when they're in need of affordable housing. And that's where we and I, as housing critic, have many questions. Is about what are we going to do in 10 years? Is the commitment from this government on addressing the affordable housing just a short-term solution? From all indications, from the agreements that we've seen, the contracts that the government has gone into, you might say, or the minister might say, that 10 years is a long-term commitment, but I don't think it is. When you look at if there's an individual who's today receiving benefits under social assistance, maybe will qualify for rent subsidies, is trying to get back to university, trying to educate themselves, trying to go back to school and hopefully better themselves, it's going to take several years for them just to get over that hump, and maybe several years just for them to try to figure out avenues for them to attempt to better themselves and try to get back to hopefully entering a university. I know there's several pieces of legislation that our party's brought forward concerning funding towards, especially towards individuals in this province who are on social assistance and trying to return to post-secondary education, especially those courses that are 3, 4 year, 5-year programs. So as I was saying, the concerns we have is that in 10 years, where are we going to be? Are we going to be left with even a worse situation that we see today? And I would hope the minister would agree that it's definitely time that the government needs to address these issues, because I've witnessed over my career, Mr. Speaker, just deplorable conditions just throughout HRM here. And I know it's not just solely in this area of the province that we see conditions that people should never be living in, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair. And I'm always concerned when I see on the news or hear that a rooming house, say in downtown Halifax, was closed because of the fire marshal going in and charging them with violations to the fire code and closing them down. It's ironic that I don't see the Minister of Community Services or a member of the government stepping in and being in front of the media. It seems to always be thrown back onto the municipality. It's always the municipality trying to figure out where they're going to put these people, because it is, I guess, through their department and through the fire department that they're the ones that actually initiated going into these rooming houses and assessing the safety and fire concerns of these rooming houses, Mr. Chairman. I find that the government is lacking in their commitment, and the minister's lacking in his commitment to be a leader in this province. He needs to be up front. He needs to be in the forefront when situations like this happen, not only in HRM, throughout the province. And I tell you, if the fire department were to execute their job appropriately, that we'd be in a mess, not only in HRM, but throughout this province, because there's so many units, there's so many apartment buildings, rooming houses, single dwellings that probably nobody should be allowed to occupy. And I've had discussions with Fire Marshal of this province about this. He used to be a member of the Sackville Fire Department. I know that he has a job to do, but he understands that if he does his job to the fullest potential of the law, that we wouldn't have enough beds in this whole province in hotel rooms to provide beds for the people that live in inadequate housing in this province. And that's why I think we need to really look at what we can do with these agreements with the federal government, especially when they're willing to get back into the programs of hopefully addressing the needs of people and individuals in our province that are required suitable housing. And that we got to look at what we have, and we got to increase public stock. Because if we don't increase the public stock, in our view, that's an asset we can have. That's something we're going to own in 10 years or 20 years. And then in that time, we're not going to be in the situation where we're going to be wondering, what are we going to do now in 10 years if the federal government, lo and behold, that the Liberal government may not even be in power in 10 days, let alone 10 years. And, what are we going to do if the federal government all of a sudden decides to get out of the picture of affordable housing again? Where is that going to leave us in this province? And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think our commitment, or this province's government's commitment to the affordable housing issue in the province solely depends on the federal government and the money they bring to the table. One of the interesting things I see when I heard about these agreements, that our portion, 50-50 cost sharing between the province and the federal government, that really it's not the province and not the taxpayers that are going to come forward with 50% of our funding. I mean, of course, we've witnessed that our 50% of the portion can come from private developers, municipalities throughout the province. So when the minister stands up and says that the government has spent $37 million or $18 million or $9 million, it's not really the government spending all that money. You have to take into account that there's other avenues for the government to utilize municipal money and other grants in lieu of when it comes to our portion of the affordable housing initiative. Some of the things we're concerned with in this budget, and maybe the minister can clarify these a little later, but I know the member from our leader mentioned these earlier, and we have a lot of concern with them, is the rural and native housing cut. I think it was $993,000. The rent subsidies supplement frozen at the 04-05 levels. Nonprofit housing programs cut by $100,000. Home repair cut by $1.5 million. There's a lot of concerns we have with the budget and the lack of vision, we believe, on the government's behalf to address the needs of the people in this province of affordable housing. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that with the message we sent today, it's a strong message that this is an area that there's a lot of concern with. I think every member of this legislature gets calls on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis, and I know our caucus does. I guess I can't speak for the other two caucuses, about the concerns people have in their community, just trying to make a living, just trying to keep a roof over their heads. And these people that are on assistance, for the most part, I know for a fact, a lot of them, they tell you up front is that, I don't vote, I don't support a certain party, but we need help. We get assistance through the government that doesn't even pay for what the going rate of an apartment, especially in my area. I've said it before, with the different amount of money that is provided for a family under community services for assistance, especially around housing, wouldn't even get a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in most of the area here in HRM. And that concerns me. It concerns a lot of members of our caucus. And it seems that every time we try to go forward with this and try to get the government to realize they need to increase more spending in this area, that it just seems to lie on deaf ears. And these people are really in dire need for this government to step up and look at addressing what really is the core issue and for many of these people, and it's the funding they receive and the programs that they can gain access to. And I'd be the first one to say is it's amazing the staff at community services, especially out in my area in the Cobequid Community Health Centre, and the work and commitment that they have. But many times they tell us is we can't do anything. We have guidelines that we have to follow. We can't bend the rules. We're instructed that we have to follow these guidelines to a T, and there seems to be no avenue for them to make, I think, what is, I would think the best call or the best judgment in dealing with community members' issues. And I bring up one issue that I was dealing with just before we came into session, was around an individual on long-term disability. She was bringing in about $875 a month, living on her own, was very ill with a respiratory problem, and was very upfront with me, Mr. Chair, about her condition and what had to happen, and was calling my office to try to get some assistance, try to get some help for her. Because this lady was potentially a lung transplant recipient in Toronto, and was living on her own, and had to give up her apartment to move to Toronto in hopes of receiving her new lungs. And the process she went through, and the doors that were shut in her face about help that she needed, I just couldn't believe it, Mr. Speaker. And this young lady who was up front with me, and I know with members of the staff at the community services level, about some of monies that she had in RSPs. This lady was up front, said, I have money put away, but I live on almost just under $900 a month. And community services initially said she would help this lady, that they'd help pay her travel to Toronto, establish her in an apartment that she needed to be within a certain distance of the hospital, and everything seemed like it was going okay. And I guess at one point, somewhere along the line, her case was reviewed and was realized that, no, we have to put the brakes on this. We can't help this lady, and I called and wondered, what was the problem? And it was because she had this money put away in RSPs. And she told them exactly what the money was for. It was her hope that after her lung transplant, that she was going to return to Nova Scotia, return to actually Sackville. She knew that she'd be required to pay for some of her medication, because not all was covered under MSI, just as her transportation there and her wait before the transplant wasn't covered by MSI. And she was told, unless she spent every last dollar she had in the bank or in RSPs, that community services wouldn't help her. And she wanted that money just to get a new life, just to go back to school after she became more healthy after her lungs, just to hopefully get a better job, to get off assistance, so that she could be a productive member of the community, which she had been for many years until her illness. And Mr. Speaker, she at Christmas did make the move up to Toronto on her own behalf, with her family's help, and with the help of the Nova Scotia Lung Association, that was setting up a grant for her, and hopefully to get donations provided to this cause to pay for her stay in Toronto while she waited for her lungs, or waited for a recipient or a donor. But she didn't make it, Mr. Chairman. She passed away about 2.5 weeks ago, still up there, trying just to struggle on $900 a month to pay a $1,500 rent in Toronto, and that was the cheapest she could find when she went up there. And, I'm sad to say that we couldn't do more for her. And it was disheartening to know that, when you had someone like this go to community services and say, listen, I need some help. She wasn't trying to hide anything from the department. She wasn't trying to hide anything from the people that assessed her. She was very upfront with what she had, what her income was, and the reason for having that income. And it was in hopes that she wouldn't need to depend on community service for that long. And that's just one personal case of mine, and I know the family doesn't mind me bringing her case up. I spoke to her family on the weekend, and they just couldn't believe that, in a province that we don't provide a service such as that, where she's forced to go out of province to get the services, that she wasn't able to get any help through Department of Health, through MSI, because they would only cover the cost of in-hospital stay. And then when her last resort was through community services, was unable to get help through that department. So it just shows that there's a lot of issues, not only pertaining to affordable housing in the province, that this government needs to address and this minister needs to address. And I would hope over the next little while that the government realize that. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to give the remainder of my time to my colleague from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Member. You do indeed, the Honourable Minister of Community Justice.
I think, in fairness to the member that had just spoke, it's important that some of his concerns that he brought up be addressed at this time, and then I look forward to hearing the comments from the member for Dartmouth North. I'm not going to go on as long as I did last time. It's certainly a much more constructive approach by the member from Sackville-Cobequid. Anyway, he spoke about his critic responsibilities, that being the housing services critic. And he made reference to the shortage of affordable housing in Nova Scotia, and I think there was an acknowledgement that there was a shortage of affordable housing in Canada. And he's right on both counts. And I would suggest that round about 1993, as the member pointed out, things started to get worse because there was a change in government. The government of the day's Minister of Finance had to make some tough decisions, and one of the first areas that he cut was the affordable housing program. That minister has since become our Prime Minister, and it's interesting that since he's become Prime Minister, he is taking some steps to restore some of the damage that was done during the time that he was Minister of Finance, which is constructive, because that's where we are today. We can't turn the clock back. All the units that were not created in that 10 years are never going to be brought back. But we can move forward, and we are moving forward, and we appreciate that the federal government has acknowledged our responsibility for social housing, as evidenced by their affordable housing program, and Nova Scotia is accepting that offer and signing on as the first Atlantic provinces, in both cases for Phase 1 and Phase 2. What the member might be interested in is that the federal government actually has a name for the savings they got from cutting their commitment to social housing. They call it the legacy savings. The honourable member might be interested to know that depending on how you calculate those savings, which stretch out through 2035 when they'll have no further obligations under the commitments that they passed over to the province, it's estimated conservatively that it will save them about $1 billion. That's $1 billion taken out of public housing. So if we're wondering why it got a lot worse after 1993, you don't have to look too much further than what the federal government has called legacy savings. They cut their support for affordable housing at that time, and we are paying the price today. In fact, Canadians right across the country are paying the price today for that decision. But again, they have come back to the table, and we are working constructively with them, and we're very pleased that they now want to make amends for what was done. We appreciate that they had their situation to deal with at that time, but it's important to put that emphasis back on public housing. The member made reference to the condition of houses in Nova Scotia, and he's quite right. We have an enviable statistic in Nova Scotia. 71% of homes, families, own their own home in Nova Scotia, and that's an extraordinary number. 71%. And in fact, that home ownership, that enviable record of home ownership, goes back for a long time. Nova Scotia was one of the first places to be settled by the Europeans, our ancestors, and 22% of our housing stock was built before the end of World War II. And if you think about that, that's a lot of units that have the chance to possibly deteriorate over that time. And if the homeowners are not in a position to effect the necessary repairs, it just makes it all the more apparent why it's important to have programs like SCAP, the Seniors Capital Assistance Program, and the Public Housing Emergency Repair Program, also known as FERP, RAP, the Rural Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program, which is cost shared between the federal government and the province. The first two are entirely provincial, to help people who otherwise might not have the means of fixing up their homes stay in them. When they need a roof, maybe their well goes dry, septic system malfunctions, this helps keep those people in their homes. Those programs are near and dear to my heart personally, and I think any MLA in this chamber would have an appreciation of how good it is to be able to provide that assistance to a constituent when they don't know how they're going to obtain those necessary housing repairs. And those programs long predate my coming into this House, but I'm very pleased that last year we were able to substantially enhance the monies that we put into those programs to shorten the waiting lists. The member spoke about the housing authorities. His concern was about the condition of the authorities, and basically it was a maintenance question. I would point out to the member that due to good operating efficiencies within the department, last year we were able to free up a couple of $1 million, which was split between augmenting the provincial emergency housing repair programs I just spoke of, and an extra $1 million went into the housing authorities for maintenance. And then when we got the $11 million through the return of the equalization monies that the federal government had clawed back a couple of years ago, $4 million went into the housing authorities, $2 million of which was for internal maintenance, interior maintenance, and $1 million was for exterior maintenance. And of course there was $1 million for something my colleague from Dartmouth North has spoken of before, and that was the need for elevators, and something that we're becoming aware of right across the province because of the changing weather pattern, the need for emergency generators. So that was $4 million that went into housing authorities because of the strategic infrastructure monies, another $1 million because of internal economies in the department, and $3.4 million which went into emergency housing repair programs. Now the member was calling for more bricks and mortar, and without wanting to be repetitious, I did file some information that spoke of the importance of the rent subsidy approach. It was determined by people that looked at this analytically that this is a much more effective and efficient way of delivering affordable housing. Specifically, it was deemed that it's about 37% efficient to put it in bricks and mortar. That is basically public housing, where they estimated it was 85 to 90% efficient if you put it into rent supplements. Now, the other reason why the province has been focusing on rent supplements is that the initial affordable housing program really was targeted more towards middle income and bricks and mortar. And it's absolutely tailored to build housing, but more for middle income people. In Nova Scotia, it was a decision of this government, and I would like to say that I had something to do with making that decision, perhaps quite a bit to do with making that decision, that we strategically were going to target these affordable housing monies to low-income Nova Scotians in greatest need of affordable housing. That was my commitment that I made to Nova Scotians. I made it in this House time and time again. I stand by that commitment. And if you're helping those in greatest need, it costs more to help them because the gap to make up the difference between what they can afford and what it costs for average market rent is greater. And that's why the number that the member from Cape Breton South was banding about 1,500 units in the first program is not the number we're shooting for. We're shooting for more like 950 there because we feel that it's more important to help 950 families that otherwise would have no means of getting affordable housing, adequate affordable housing, than to help 1,500 that can get some form of affordable housing. It may not be as nice as we'd like it to be for them, but we are going to be targeting the lowest income Nova Scotians in greatest need of affordable housing. He also spoke a little bit, I believe, by reference, to some of the challenges of working through the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation, which is the corporation that's owned by the province of Nova Scotia and that actually delivers these new public housing units, if we own them, as opposed to working with organizations and other private sector landlords. And as the representative for Lower Sackville, the member would be aware that it seems to be still a challenge out there for the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation to put up a unit that's targeted for families. There was another one that we're still trying to negotiate. We're still trying to negotiate one for another area in HRM, and we're trying to be sensitive to the communities, but it's interesting that when we do it through third parties, whether it's nonprofit organizations or commercial landlords, that there's hardly a ripple. People all agree that we need more affordable housing, but it seems that it's more difficult sometimes to deliver it when it comes to the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation. And that is an observation that I have seen from my perspective as minister, and I'm trying to be respectful of everybody in this challenge. The member spoke about frozen rent subsidies, and again, I want to assure the member that the comments that were made just perhaps an hour ago by another one of his colleagues about the allegedly freezing of rent subsidies, if he looks at 4.4 in the supplements, he will find that yes, there's $2.6 million of rent subsidies shown on the line, but what's not shown is the increase in affordable housing, which includes the new rent subsidies, and that has gone up from about $7.5 million to 10.3 million. Actually, 7,550,000 to 10,300,000. And a one-year increase, that's about a 30%, and most people would say 30% is a pretty big increase in a budget. So we are moving ahead in that area, and it is an important area, and I appreciate the comments of the member and his questions. The last thing I want to deal with is he was talking about the condition of the rooming houses in the city, and the member might be aware that last November Mayor Peter Kelly and I convened a meeting of a lot of organizations that are devoted to helping the homeless and other people that are perhaps not as fortunate. And one of the things that came out of this, or that we've been working on and that we were able to share with those organizations, is that we have a memorandum of understanding with the city. If they know of a situation that they think is going to require attention, they give us a heads up so that we don't discover that the fire marshal or the building inspector has gone in there, evicted everybody, and they're out in the street. We do try to work with them. We're not going to compromise health and safety. That's not negotiable. But where it's not so definitive, we do try to work with the city, and we have a good working relationship with the city. I enjoy my personal rapport with Mayor Kelly. Mayor Kelly is a very caring person, and he cares deeply, as do I, about those in need of affordable housing and the homeless. So, Honourable Member, I think that touches on most of your shopping list, and I look forward to questions hopefully from the member from Dartmouth North. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think it might be a bit presumptuous for the honourable minister to hopefully wait for questions from the honourable member of Dartmouth North. I want to say, Mr. Chairman, first of all, that I want to acknowledge that in 2003 we were fortunate enough to expand the number of members to the Legislative Assembly on the New Democratic Government side. And as a result of that, I've been lifted with some of the burden and responsibility, and we share it across the government departments. And one of those departments is the Department of Community Services. And I want to thank the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid for taking up the housing portfolio. I think the honourable member now understands the frustration that I have exercised over the years that I have been the critic for in the Department of Housing. I also want to thank the honourable member for our Dartmouth South Portland Valley, who now must also be frustrated by the experiences that she's having as a critic of community services in the province of Nova Scotia. It is a very unwieldy department. It is extremely frustrating to get work done. The department works so bloody slow that, Minister, it is impossible to be able to address the issues that are in my constituency and the remaining 51 constituencies across this province. There seems to have been an aim by this government when it came into power in 1999 to balance budgets, which in all sense is not a bad thing. Balancing budgets is not a bad thing in this province. But when you balance the budgets on the back of the most vulnerable in this province, then there is something radically wrong, Mr. Chairman. And when I see this government boasting about bringing on 3 balanced budgets, not balanced budgets, but surpluses, and in this year having the tune of some $63.7 million in surplus to this province, while we see people marching to the food banks, while we see people in Nova Scotia living in poverty, we have a province, Mr. Chairman, of less than 1 million people. We have a province, Mr. Chairman, where 50% of those who are employed earn an income of less than $22,000 a year. That's what we have in this province. And we have a debt that needs to be curtailed, and the government on that side of the floor is trying to curtail a $12 billion debt on the backs of the most vulnerable Nova Scotians. How else is it, Mr. Chairman, that we stand here in frustration year after year after year, and in 6 years, and I, as a critic during that period of time, brings before the Minister of Community Services the kind of social concerns that I see out there, the kind of poverty. Not only do I bring it to the Minister and his government across this legislative floor, but I talk to the Minister confidentially on a number of the issues as well. And the Minister fully understands that if in fact we are reaping the benefits of CHST transfers from the federal government of Canada, and we are reaping the benefits from the offshore economic development with respect to the offshore payments. And that money is going to go towards paying the debt, but it still leaves an additional $50 million that can be better spent and helping the most vulnerable people in this province. Then that's exactly what we should do. There is absolutely no question, Minister, we can have it both ways. The problem is, it's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of where you want to put your priority dollars. And I can never, for the love of me, as I stand here in this legislature and look, and I know that the people who are watching Ledge TV today are sitting there watching Ledge TV and listening to this debate on community services and asking themselves and wondering how it is that someone in the Department of Community Services can receive a bonus. I can understand that coming from the Department of Finance, because finance is talking about balancing budgets and bringing forward. I can understand that coming from the Department of Tourism, because it's a matter of generating, and you set quotas and revenues for doing that. I can understand that coming from a number of the departments over there, the Minister of Energy, the Ministry of Economic Development. As all those Nova Scotians who have Ledge TV on here today can see, that you can understand and rationalize where and how those individuals might receive a bonus, even though it should be somewhat transparent and it's totally wrong. What I cannot see, Mr. Minister, is how, and I can't even possibly calculate, how the process is set out where someone in the Department of Community Services receives a bonus. And I can tell you that there are many Nova Scotians who ask the same thing. If in fact this department is set up to protect the most vulnerable people in our province, the most vulnerable people, persons on disabilities, seniors, persons in poverty, persons who have to go to a food bank, then how is it that someone can receive a bonus more than what the individual will ever receive in 3 years? you know, it really troubles me to have to stand here in this legislative assembly and look across the legislative floor and stand here and debate a department's budget that, in fact, Mr. Chairman, tears my heart out. It tears my heart out because no matter how many times I have stood here and talked about this very important issue, it seems as though there's been a wall built up that no matter how much I blow, that wall can never be torn down. And it can never be broken down. And to stand here and to know the frustration that my colleagues are going through with respect to their second term and debating the budget of community services is something that we all should stop, sit back, and reflect and ask what's going on. Just think about it. Bonuses. Bonuses in the Department of Community Services. How do you arrive at a bonus in the most vulnerable department in this province? People should be rewarded for the good work they do. There's no question. The way I was rewarded for the good work I did was if I didn't perform, I was out the door. I didn't get a bonus for setting the quotas on the number of sheets of paper I might be able to produce or anything like that. I got a bonus saying you perform and this is what we're expected of you, and if you don't do it, then you're out the door. If you set the bar high enough so that no one can reach it, then in fact, Mr. Chairman, no one reaches the bonus point. But even at that level, I sit here and I watch people in the Department of Community Services having to craft their budget in such a way that whereas they're expected to pay, and they're expected to pay money, as the honourable member from Cape Breton South had indicated. And Mr. Minister, you will be very much aware of this. The honourable member from Cape Breton South talked about overpayments. Now, let me talk a bit about overpayments. The honourable member of Cape Breton South worked at the municipal level, I believe, with respect to community services. There is no one, I think, in this office more knowledgeable about the issues around community services than a member of Cape Breton South and the member for Halifax Needham, who has in fact studied social work. But I do want to tell you that as a layperson, I have learned a tremendous amount about people and people's responsibilities during my 7 years in this legislative assembly. And I have watched the kind of action that takes place. Now I want to go back to the issue of overpayment. We know, the minister and his department knows, that there is no possible way for those individuals to pay back those overpayments. We have already heard of where those overpayments come from. They sometimes come from come from workers' compensation. More often than not, they come from Canada Pension Disabilities, which that department requires people to sign a paper for and make application for if they're disabled. You know, that's the crutch of the whole thing. And it might also come from an insurance policy, Mr. Chairman. Now, the point is this. There's no question about some of that being recoverable if you talk about the fairness and the equity of the taxpayers in this province. There's absolutely no question. But where do you draw the line when you haul every single penny out of those individuals who have been bleeding for 4 or 5 years before they even get their Canada Pension Plan? Now, I asked you, and I asked the Deputy Minister of Community Services who stood before, who came before, who was a witness before, the Community Services Committee, Standing Committee on Community Services. And I said, Deputy Minister, look at this. If we can, in fact, turn and write off small businesses who owe the government, and there's a limitation, and they cut them off. They may owe the government tax revenue, but because they don't pay it, they cut them off, and they can turn around and set up a business under another number or another name and receive funding from the government, because they're an entity unto themselves. There's no such thing as, a business being a personal thing. But because somebody is personal, it's tangible, and you can touch it, and you can stick your finger on it and stick your finger in it, means that you got to pull it out. And that's the sad part of it. So you reach in their pockets and you pull it out. I asked the Deputy Minister of Community Services to look at this. And I said, at least recognize that there needs to be a statute of limitations. around this very issue. The Deputy Minister did say to me that she, in fact, and her department would look at that. That, in fact, there would be a review. I have heard absolutely nothing. Do you know that the federal government, through the employment insurance, if someone draws their unemployment insurance, and there is an overpayment, and that overpayment hasn't been collected for 7 years, then the statute of limitations clicks in, and that's a write-off. The Department of Community Services, rather than badgering and trying to take out of people on social assistance money out of their allocated budget to pay that through Service Nova Scotia's collection agency, needs to have a second reflect and a second look. Let me tell you, Mr. Minister, and for those of you who are listening here today, when you craft a budget for an individual that's on social assistance, there is a craft of a basic need. The government meets the very, very basic need. They set aside the number of dollars that is going to be for shelter component. They set the number of dollars that are going to be for personal use. And that includes sundries and the whole bit. Now, at one time, they also paid for the children of those families. What happens now is the government ingratiates itself by saying that the National Child Benefit is something we will not claw back. And that government, true to its word, introduced a piece of the minister's and the premier's book during the election campaign, the platform. They did not claw back the National Child Tax Benefit. But what they didn't do is they didn't continue to keep on with the additional dollars that the Department of Community Services provided to those young people in order to help the families out. What is it, and what does it take for government to think outside of the terms, like outside the box, outside the envelope, and think about ways of doing, a new way of delivering programs to the most vulnerable Nova Scotians? All the years that we were sitting here crafting and balancing budgets and bragging and boasting about surpluses, we were watching more and more people go to the food banks. We were watching our most vulnerable Nova Scotians going to food banks in this province, a province of less than 1 million people. And that was something new. That was a phenomenon. Now it is one of the major industries in this province. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I am the one who has to bring those clients in, along with the other members of the remaining 51 constituencies, who have to sit them down and talk to them about why that is. And we have to say to them that whether you like it or not, it's what the government of the day considers to be its priorities, so that you don't have enough money for the right nutritional foods, so that you must go to food banks in this province. So when they come to my office, I've got no choice but to coach them on how best to use their dollars. What we have to do sometimes is we have to tell them to go to the food bank to do their shopping for non-perishable goods, and then to use the money that community service gives them for perishable items. You know, what do you think about something like that? What do you think that each of us, if each one of us were to do that? And we all know that because of our age and the age that we sit here in this legislative assembly, that the majority of us have seen hard times. We have come from large families. We know how difficult it is to manage. But yet, Mr. Chairman, that does not translate into legislative policy throughout this province. There are so many things that I can talk about, and I do know, unfortunately, that my time is running out. And that's the most unfortunate part of this, Mr. Chairman, is because I certainly have a number of other areas in which I'm going to. But I want to tell you that in this province, individuals who want a pair of glasses, who want dental work in this province, and it's ironic that the government provides them with a quick card, but every single dental organization in this province ends up being a maximum of 20% less than what they get. So they have to take that 20% out of their budget and pay for that dental cost. They also have to pay for that through their eyeglasses or have an agency or an organization out in the community. And those agencies and organizations out in the community can no longer provide the dollars because the government has gotten the gambling business and took away revenues that they would normally have generated to offset and assist those individuals in the community. Mr. Chairman, I never even touched the basis of housing. I want to talk about the minister's most recent announcement in Cape Breton and Inverness, and I believe it was called McDonald Hall. I believe, in fact, there was an agreement, and that there was a budget that came in that said that, in fact, this was $600,000 to build. I believe the developer has already put a proposal in. I don't know if it's been approved yet or not, but I think it has been. And I asked the minister, 2 years ago, I stood before this legislature, 3 years ago, I stood before this legislature, and I listened to a group of individuals, and many groups of individuals, some 47 individuals, whom in fact comprise themselves together to bring in a Kendrick report. A report in which this government endorsed and announced that it would be brought forward. This government paid the shot for the Kendrick report. This government didn't even bother to have the courtesy to honor one of the very first basic fundamental commitments, and that was to set up a blue ribbon committee to study the issue of disabled persons in this province and how they would be funded and where those dollars should go. As a matter of fact, what we're seeing now is we're seeing the closure of small options homes. Do you ever look in your community and see how many small options homes have actually closed, or there's no beds available? And why do you think there's a freeze on small options homes? I asked you to reflect and think about that. Why do you think there's a freeze on small options homes? Well, I'll tell you why there is a freeze on small options homes. It's because the government's gotten back into institutionalizing disabled people in this province. We get 13-unit buildings. Rather than thinking about what we did in 1966 when we deinstitutionalized individuals with disabilities, both intellectual and physical. In 1966, we decided to move them out of institutions like the Nova Scotia Hospital, bring them in the communities, and develop small options homes to allow those individuals to be part of the community. Now we have developed and moved away and moved back by this government into the institutionalization of persons with disabilities. Think about it, Mr. Chairman. Why else would the government be so proud to announce units of approximately, and I don't know how much the one in Inverness is, it might be a 13-unit building. It's a 13-unit building. Actually, it's a 12-unit building, I do know. But I was just checking with the Honourable Minister who represents the area. One of them's a respite unit. So there's actually 12 bed units, and the other one's a respite unit. And I tell you, that is this, and there's also one going on Main Street in Dartmouth. As a matter of fact, it's going in, I believe, on Lake Crest Drive, Main Street, Dartmouth. Now, I need to ask you, and I need to know, if the minister has actually given consideration to why this is happening. Is this convenient for the government to do this? Does it run counter to community groups? Does it run counter to the Kendrick report recommendation? Does it run counter to the deinstitutionalization of 1966? Then the minister needs to let us know, and he needs to let us know about this. Another area, and a bone of contention of mine was, in fact, seniors housing and seniors units. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to tour the province most recently, and I've heard from seniors who spoke about the lack of seniors facilities in Royal Nova Scotia. As a matter of fact, some seniors have told me that they're on a 2-year waiting list, up to a 4-year waiting list, some of them, and that in fact they would have to move out of their community in order to get seniors housing. Now, these are people who have lived there all their lives, who will be passing their home on to their children. And Mr. Chairman, I tell you, I don't know what policy that is or where that government needs to go, But I can tell you it's not a policy that I've seen in the new directions of 1998, which in fact told this government how to address the housing issue, which had stakeholders and everyone else come before this government and talk about it. I also talked to the minister about rent supplements and about the utilization of rent supplements to allow the rent supplements to be portable, that people who live in the community, who volunteer in the community, and who can do a good job in the community and who have been long-standing citizens of the community could in fact be there and continue to live there. Mr. Chairman, I want to tell you that that is the kind of thing that I am still waiting to hear. I'm still waiting to hear the minister say that yes, rent supplements can be portable. They're not going to one individual contractor. They're not going to one individual landholder. They're not going to one ICON, investment property owner of this province. IPONs, excuse me for saying. They're not going to one individual group, but they're going out there into the community. Mr. Chairman, I am very pleased and delighted that at least the burden of responsibility has been moved off my shoulder and shared with my colleagues in this legislative assembly.
Order. Time has expired for the NDP. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, you can actually look at this as probably the seventh inning stretch. I'm actually going to give you a chance to get up and answer some questions during this round. But I wanted to say to begin with that probably coming from a riding such as mine in Glace Bay, that about I'm just ballparking it, but about 65% of my caseload would involve community services cases in Glace Bay, and that's probably the same as most in this legislature. Not most MLAs, but most that you would find in an area that would be similar to mine. Let's put it that way. And I have to say from the outset that the staff at the Community Services Office in Glace Bay, you have a tremendous staff there. You have some fine people in Rosemary Lewis and Graham Crosby and Sue Jarrell, who are supervisory personnel at that staff. I've worked with on appeals with Mark Ryan, for instance, and the commissioner who does appeals hearings, and Darren McFadgen, have been fair individuals who have done some good work and work under some difficult circumstances. You know the situation there because you've heard about it from the NSGEU in terms of caseloads that individual caseworkers are handling there. They are large and unfortunately probably growing, Mr. Minister. But there are a couple of items in Glace Bay that I know have been brought to your attention, and I hope to get you to go on the record today as to what's being done to try and solve the problems there regarding these two items. One of them involves Brass Tack Industries, which is an employment training and opportunity center in Glace Bay. It's an agency that provides day programs for adults with mental disabilities. It's a tremendous agency, I should say. You talk about a great staff that does some wonderful things with people, and the staff at Brass Tack Industries is second to none. They're a very small organization that services Glace Bay and surrounding area. But for the past about 10 years, they've been implementing an off-site community-based program that enables their clients to have access and to participate in their community. They've been doing that over the past 10 years with federal grants. And they're faced with the decision now whether to cancel their off-site programs due to some insufficient funding. It's my understanding they've applied to the Department of Community Services for some permanent funding. The Department of Community Services has responded, my understanding again, with a grant which will employ 2 people for the period of 1 year. Now the problem is that over the past 10 years, there have been approximately 99 people not client. I'm not talking about clients at Brass Tacks. 99 people who have been employed on grants that have gone through the organization. Now, this poses a problem in itself because the individuals, the clients who are attending at Brass Tacks, become accustomed to having someone there, familiar, all of the time. So all of a sudden, after a while, their grant is up and new people come in, and you can see the problem that would create. Now, I'm sure the minister understands that this is important, that this is invaluable work that is being done there, the people who are doing the work, the people who are served by the work. And Mr. Minister, it's you know, we take for granted sometimes our ability to do what we do. Our ability, for instance, to do something as simple as going for a walk. It seems a rather simple thing to us. But for those individuals at Brass Tack Industries, they cannot do that unless they are supervised. So it becomes an obstacle if they don't have the supervision enabling the clients there to give them the support to do something that we would consider to be an everyday procedure. So I would like to know, Mr. Minister, there is, according to page 4.7 of the supplementary detail, the rehabilitation workshop budget has increased by some $200,000. So I would, if you could, please, to outline the details of that line item increase in the supplementary detail.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite, first of all, for his comments about my staff in the Glace Bay office. And again, it's very important that staff get this kind of feedback. And when you speak of them in that manner publicly, it really makes a difference in their work environment. We certainly try to support them in what's often a difficult job because they are dealing with people that are in need by definition. It's a program of last resort, really, and that's not an easy job. So I appreciate the member's comments in that regard. The member is speaking of an adult service center in his area, Brass Tack Industries. You've acknowledged that they've received a Canada-Nova Scotia Skills and Learning Framework grant, which has allowed them to get 2 additional staff to continue their outreach program. Specifically, you're asking about the increase of the $200,000 in the line, and basically that's to make sure that their salaries and benefits remain current. In addition to that, I can give a little more information, which the member may already have, but I think it's good to get it on the record. In 2003-2004, they received $141,646.47. That was what went to them. Their funding comes through a combination of an operating grant, which would be a set amount that goes to them, and a per diem, which is calculated based on the number of days that they care for participants in the program. They provide them work. Also, they are still in negotiations with staff as actually I think it's the last outstanding issue on the strategic infrastructure monies that were announced in November. This is the $11 million. They did put in a submission. We're working with them on that, and my hope is that at the end of the day that there will be an additional grant to help them in that regard.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, it's not that, don't get me wrong, it's not that the grant funding is not appreciated. But what I'm being told by people at Brass Tack Industries is that it's full-time funding that is required. These are off-site programs that are being offered to about 28 full-time clients and about 6 part-time clients, and they have a waiting list between about 18 to 20 people. That if the full-time funding were available, that they could hire the staff on a permanent basis to continue the programs that they have. The fact that it's grant funding is actually part of the problem, as I understand it, and a big part of the problem as far as the clients are concerned, because again, they just become familiar with someone who's working with them, and all of a sudden, that person is gone and a new person is in their place. So it's not that the grant funding isn't appreciated, it's just that the grant funding is not permanent enough. And I would like to know if you could please indicate whether or not the budget then for brass tacks has been increased. Does that enable them to continue the off-site programming, the actual budget, the line budget item for brass tack industries?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the answer to your question is no, that would be through the supplemental grant. I do think it's fair to point out that we have about 30 adult service centres across the province. Generally attract some of the most wonderful people that you're going to find anywhere in your community. I know that in New Minas we have the Flower Cart, which to me will always set the standard for these adult service centers, and I never hear any complaint from them or any of the others about having to apply for grants. They quite happily apply to HRSD every year, and they seem to have a great working relationship with them. What Brass Tack Industries wants is the province to come in and provide that as part of their core funding, and we will continue to support the area that we have identified as being for services to people with disabilities, and we look forward to working with HRDC and the 30 adult service centres across the province to augment those services, including the outreach.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Glace Bay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the Minister understands that, yes, they do want this as part of their core funding. That's exactly the message that you've been receiving in letters from Brass Tack Industries and letters from myself and letters from families and support people back home. You know, it's the clients who are there are fortunate to have the support of organizations such as Brass Tack Industries, because they're not able to have their voices heard normally, Mr. Minister. So I'm wondering, why isn't that? Explain to me then why you wouldn't view the offside programming budget of brass tacks as a priority item. This is an item that could, number one, it could employ people, first of all, but it could also take care of the needs of over, well, if you look at the waiting list, then you're looking at over 50 people who need the services. It could provide the needs to over 50 people on a full-time basis. Why wouldn't that be treated as a priority by the Department of Community Services?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the member from Glace Bay is giving me a chance to explain where the province's responsibilities are, where HR, Human Resources, Skills Development's responsibilities are, and that area that tends to fall in between. Brass Tack Industries is one of 30 adult service centers, is basically looking for special treatment, different than the other 29. The reason that this is a gray area is that we accept our responsibility for funding them for those that work within the center. But when you get into outreach, then the question becomes the degree of disability. And if you've got somebody that's perfectly able, it's Human Resources Skills Development that takes the lead in terms of assisting them provide employment. So you've got people in the outreach program that have abilities, but they have some disability, and they need some supervision in order to be able to pursue a job or to conduct a productive career. And that's a great service. So I guess that what we have concluded is that we're working with HRSD, and for those people that are not clearly full-time clients that work inside Brass Tack Industries or the Flower Cart or any of the other 28 adult service centers, but that are actually placed outside the community, we have shared that responsibility with HRSD, and we look forward to continuing to share it with them. We cannot single out one of 30 adult service centers and take over what we deem as shared responsibility with the federal government and make it all provincial core funding.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have another subject that I want to bring up, but before I leave that one, just let me say that the people at Brass Tack Industries are not looking for special treatment. They're just looking for fair treatment. And I would suggest to you that if these off-site programs are as successful as you're suggesting, as I'm suggesting, that perhaps they should be looked at as part of core funding of the Department of Community Services in this province. If they are that much of a success, and I know they are in one instance, and I only know of the background of Brass Tack Industries, which have been around for some time, and I know of the tremendous work that they do with their clients and the tremendous service that it provides to their community. That to me is a success. If that translates into core funding and permanent funding equals a success for those clients, then that to me would be a win-win situation, not only for Brass Tack Industries, but for the Department of Community Services in this province. And I hope that the minister would continue to take a look at the situation in terms of whether or not someday core funding could be provided, not just to Brass Tack Industries. If we have 30 such organizations in this province, I'm sure they're doing comparable work in other areas, and I'm sure that they deserve the funding as well. So let's take a look at that. The other subject that I wanted to bring up was one of the town daycare center in Glace Bay, Mr. Chair. The minister is quite aware of this situation, and I must say to the minister that when I first brought the matter of town daycare to the attention of the Department of Community Services, the deputy minister was very quick to respond. As a matter of fact, I don't know how quickly deputy ministers, if there's any record of how quick they respond to things in this province, but I would suggest that if this was the case, that perhaps your deputy minister won one of the quickest responses. Believe me, I'm not trying to get anything more here by saying that. I'm just telling you exactly what happened. It was a quick response to what is, and what she realizes, is a very serious problem in Glace Bay. And that is, with the town daycare center, under orders of the fire marshal, that they move on to a better building. They provide the space currently for about 72 subsidized seats. They're licensed for 94 subsidized seats. They have a waiting list of 100 people. 100 kids. People, yes, but 100 kids. Most of that waiting list would be between the age of 18 months to 3 years. So toddlers is the biggest group of people that they have on the waiting list. And as I understand it, the town daycare center has applied under a program to the Department of Community Services that they would have, has applied for an expansion grant. So if I could, under the Child Care Expansion Loan Program, if I could ask the minister the current status of the expansion grant program, how much money has been set aside for the fiscal year for that program and loan programs, and to give us a time frame as to when people can expect to hear whether or not they have qualified for that grant program.
Thank you. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the honourable member from Glace Bay would probably not be surprised if I was to tell him that I fully expected to get that question sometime before I was done with the estimates, and from that member. He has written me expressing his concern about the continuation of town daycare, and we share that concern. I appreciate the comments about the Deputy Minister's responsiveness. Just as a little point of background, and I've got all the numbers that the member is looking for and his answers to when they'll be making recommendations. Child care centers are big operations, and they require a lot of government support to run them. In 2003-2004, town daycare received $501,000 $916.23 in funding from the department. And they are by no stretch of the imagination the largest in the province, but they are a large one. They're a very important piece of the social safety net or infrastructure in Glace Bay, and I am well aware of the difficulties they're facing in terms of having to get into a new building by a certain point in time. There was an agreement that was negotiated with the fire marshal that they can continue in their present premise under certain conditions, but it is understood that they have to be out at a set date in the not too distant future. So the member is referring to the Startup and Expansion Grant Program. The total is $1.6 million. It's split between nonprofits and commercial. The nonprofits are eligible for grants. Typically, the grant is targeted at 75-25. That means that the child care center is expected to come up with 25%, and the hope is that the province could come up with the 75. So those are the parameters. So of the 2.6, 1.6 is for grants, and the other 1 is in essence for interest-free loans for established commercial centers that meet the criteria that we have laid out. So of the 1.6, we've had 22 applications, and we've had 8 for the commercial. And I just give that by way of being complete, because there are others out there that might be interested in the commercial side. In total, it comes up to $6.4 million worth of applications, and we've got 2.6 to divvy up. I am hopeful that if we're able to conclude the bilateral agreement with the federal government for the new child care monies, early learning and child care monies, it might afford us an opportunity to further enhance this. But I want to tell you, Honourable Member, that the recommendations are coming forward next month as to how to divvy up those monies amongst the applicants. And I am very concerned about the continuation of town daycare in Glace Bay. I don't mean to say that in the sense that I'm concerned that they're going to shut down. I'm concerned that everything possibly be done to allow that organization to continue. I know that they're just an integral part of your community, and I appreciate the way that you have represented them here today.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to point out to the Minister is quite aware of the fact that this is, you're right, it's an integral part of Glace Bay. It's very, very important. It's a 30-year-old facility that was one of the first in the country to offer a full service for children with disabilities, for instance. This has been a center that has done really some groundbreaking stuff in Canada and has a tremendous, tremendous reputation. As a matter of fact, now on their own, they're out raising money on their own. They're fundraising through donations and from businesses, from former parents and so on. They've had bake sales and they've had the usual fundraising stuff. They've managed to raise $34,000 on their own to date. So it's not like their board of directors or the staff is sitting back saying, we want to put all of the weight on the minister's shoulders and hope someday that he'll come through. They're not doing that. They're working very hard on behalf of their community to try and keep that center. It's obvious, Mr. Minister, Mr. Chair, to the Minister that there's a need in Glace Bay. If you have over 100 children on a waiting list, I think the need is quite obvious. So the Minister has given an indication. Can he give us a little bit tighter time frame as to when town daycare will be informed as to whether or not the government is willing to support them in the construction of a new daycare center?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As I recall the briefing note from a couple of weeks ago, they made reference to the decisions would be made in June. I'm expecting that to come back as recommendations, and I guess the comfort that I will try to offer to the member again is that I do recognize how absolutely central town daycare is to Glace Bay, and indeed we do hope to increase the capacity of childcare in the province, assuming again that we're able to avail ourselves of that federal childcare program. We are working on the bilateral agreement at the highest levels, And that would certainly be one of the things we want to do. And if there's a waiting list of 100 families or 100 children to get into town daycare, I think that probably bodes well for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping, I'm praying that the minister is right, because if for instance, if those spaces are lost, the bottom line is that families are going to move elsewhere. You lose families, or either one or the other. You have a lot of people who end up not going to work because they won't be able to put their children in a daycare and in order for them to go to work. You lose the bottom line. The community is the one who will lose. So if, and I appreciate what the minister is saying, and I know that the situation is what it is, but if you have, as the minister has said, if you have just over $2 million to give out, and you have over $6 million in applications, somebody obviously is going to be left on the losing end of things. So I'm wondering, and just wondering, is there any way at all that funding could be made available for town daycare through line items other than the daycare budget that would see the appropriate financial support would be available for town daycare center?
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, honourable member. A very prudent question for you to ask under the circumstances. I made reference to the possibility of the additional $20.4 million in the federal-provincial bilateral agreement, but I would tell the honourable member that there are more monies that are in the child care section of the budget this year, and through the early learning and child care agreement. That's the one that was signed a couple of years ago, and it would be my expectation that there will be more startup and expansion monies regardless of whether the bilateral agreement comes in. But let's work on that bilateral agreement, because that'll help solve a lot of problems for a lot of families that are looking for child care in this province. Thank
you, Minister. Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I should have at the first indicated that I was going, but I am going to share some of my time with another member, the member for Preston. So having said that, I want to thank the minister, but again, I want to, as much as I can, impress upon him how serious a situation this is in Glace Bay. In both instances that I've talked of today, Brass Tack Industries, Glace Bay Town Daycare Center are two not just pieces of infrastructure in Glace Bay. They are two organizations that have done tremendous work for the people of Glace Bay with their children, with people with mental disabilities. And it's something, I guess, that kind of tugs at my heartstrings when you talk about these institutions. I've had a child go through Town Daycare Center, tremendous organization, and certainly have worked with Brass Tack Industries over the years and watch the wonderful work that they do. So just to impress upon the minister, and I know, because I know from his correspondence that he certainly is aware of it, and he's kept up to date on what is going on, but the importance of those two items that I have raised today to the people of Glace Bay, I cannot impress upon you enough, Mr. Minister, just what that means to the people of Glace Bay. And I thank you for your time, and I'd like to turn it over now to my colleague from Preston.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions I'd like to ask the minister today, and some you may not be able to answer right off the cuff, and I would appreciate if you just indicate if you'd be willing to table the information. The first one I have is, several years ago there was some agreements made between the provincial and the federal government to arrange mortgages for people on low income so they could buy homes and work through the process of being able to afford to buy a home otherwise that they couldn't get financed through the bank or other processes. And I'm talking about agreements that were probably made in the late 70s, 80s, around that time. Would the minister be willing to table those complete agreements here regarding mortgages and on low-cost housing for that time period?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member for his question. And I guess I'm looking for a little more clarification. We have the Modest Family Housing Program, which is 100% financing for families that have a combined income of less than $50,000 for a maximum mortgage amount of $70,000. I believe those are the right numbers. That is one program. Plus, we took over some mortgages when we signed the social housing agreement with the federal government back in 1997. So if you could just give us a little bit more direction as to which area you'd like information on.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
Thank you. Actually, I'd like them on both programs. Would you commit to providing both?
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Again, honourable member, I'm going to need a little clarification on this, because if you're asking for the individual files, of course, we're not able to give you that information because of protection of privacy. But if you're looking for the gross numbers on the mortgages, well, here, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to give you the chance to explain further.
Okay, thank you. The Honourable Minister, or the Honourable Member for Preston.
Actually, what I'm looking for is the actual agreements that were signed between the province and the federal government, and the complete agreements with any amendments or anything that's been added to them.
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The member is looking for, in essence, the master agreements that facilitated the transfer to the province. That's no problem. That's a matter of public record, and I've asked staff to provide the honourable member with that information.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Yes, would the minister be able to provide those tomorrow? Would that be possible?
The Honourable Minister on the question.
I'm advised by my staff that that will not be a problem, so we will have them here for you on Opposition Day.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
Thank you very much. I await the information in those agreements. I think they were good agreements, and they provided a lot of people with affordable housing, which is excellent. No matter who instigated or how it come about, I think it's excellent. I have some questions on other processes. Now, when an agreement is made with your department for someone to take a loan out to purchase a home, or from either with the department or however they purchase a home, and they don't keep their commitment to pay the mortgage on that home, is there a written policy that the department uses in the process of getting prepared to either get the person to pay their mortgage on time, work with that person so that can happen, or failing all those activities and all those things that the department would, I trust and fully appreciate that they would do, before they go in the process of tax sale or sale or repossession of the home? Is there a written policy to do that? And if there is, would the minister commit to tabling it tomorrow?
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The honourable member made reference to the value of social housing agreements. I just want to caution the honourable member that the agreement that we were going to provide him tomorrow, that I'm going to provide him tomorrow, is the where the federal government turned over responsibility to the provincial government, which actually saved the federal government, it's estimated, somewhere in the vicinity of $1 billion in social housing between that time and 2035. So I'm not sure that I would describe it as anything that created more social housing. It was just, how are we going to manage the existing stock of social housing? But with regards to your question about procedure for clients that have taken out mortgages, or actually we should say, I guess, customers that have taken out mortgages, because they're not necessarily clients of the Department of Community Services. In fact, they may well not be clients. I am personally loath, and I know that my staff are, to have to precipitate any sort of foreclosure proceedings. But by the same token, we are obliged to make sure that clients do honor their commitments, because those are public monies, and as they're paid back, if you think about it going into the pool almost like a co-op, those monies are now freed up for other people that want that same chance that that customer had when they took out the mortgage. So what I would tell the honourable member is that we absolutely bend over backwards to work with them, to make sure that they understand what's coming to them, make sure they have legal counsel. All these steps are taken before we ever foreclose on a mortgage. We're not in the business of foreclosing, but sometimes we're not given any alternatives but to foreclose. But it's certainly never by the choice of the department.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
I appreciate the minister's response to that, and I no way wanted to insinuate or indicate or anything like that the department is making a habit of repossessing people's homes. That's not the case at all. I know there's circumstances that arise from time to time that the department's exhausted everything and done everything they possibly can to try to keep somebody in the home that they've been a customer, and I stress, as you indicated, customer that may be struggling to pay for, and for whatever reason they can't pay for it. Really what I'm asking for is a written policy of how, if the department gets in that very unfortunate situation, and the individual gets in, or individuals get in that unfortunate situation, if there is a written policy that the department follows in such cases.
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Hudson has made note of your request, and he will include that with the rest of the information that you've requested for delivery tomorrow on Opposition Day.
Thank you, Minister, for that, and recognize the member for Preston.
Thank you very much. These questions I'm asking are got to be have to be very, very difficult for your staff to deal with, because it's nothing more precious than owning your own home, especially for people that have, unfortunately, don't make as much income as maybe some other people do. Also, could you provide how many homes the department has repossessed? When I say repossessed, I don't know if that's the right word or not, repossessed, between the years of 2003, say January the 1st, 2003, and the end of April this year.
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we'll endeavour to get the member that information. And I do know the member had a difficult situation in his own constituency recently, and I would just tell the member I can have some empathy due to recent experience in my own.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you. It's not comforting to know you had the same problem, unfortunately, but those things do happen, and we've got to try to find solutions. And I realize the minister is very caring about this type of situation, and will do everything he can, every time he can, to do these things. But there are rules and regulations that you must follow. Also, when you provide me the list, could you provide me, along with that, any properties that were repossessed, and I hope I'm using the right term here, a list of the homes that were repossessed in that time period that are just indicated between January 1st, 2003 and the end of April 2005. The list of homes that you would have made public. Now, I'm not asking for homes that you're negotiating with now. That's none of my business, and it's nobody's business except the departments and the individuals. But any outstanding loans and the amount of those loans when the home went up for either for sale, not tax sale, but repossession or sale by auction, or however it's done, and the amounts received from those properties and when they were sold. Any of the ones that are already sold, and the ones that aren't sold, just what the outstanding balances are.
Thank you. Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to make sure that we confirm what the honourable member is looking for. I believe what he's asking for is what was the amount outstanding at the time of the foreclosure, and what were we actually able to realize of that amount. And in some cases, one would hope that it might be more than the outstanding amount of the mortgage, and that possibly some of those monies could conceivably go back to the homeowner.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Preston.
Yes, actually, the information I do want is the amounts that were outstanding at the time that the department had to take action, that to move forward, and the actual sale amount. And you actually moved into my next question. What transpires if there is a surplus in that amount? Say if a house is worth, say it's got an arrears of, I'll just use a random number, $10,000, and it's sold, and the costs are, say, $12,000 total with the outstanding mortgage and legal fees and everything else you've got to do, and it's sold for, say, $22,000. What happens to the other $10,000?
Thank you, member. The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. What the honourable member is asking is what happens with any surplus over and above the outstanding amount of the mortgage. That is handled at arm's length by the Sheriff's Department. So if there are other liens that are registered against that home, presumably the Sheriff would discharge those liens before giving any residue to the homeowner or to the former homeowner. But that's not something that's managed by the Department of Community Services. The actual foreclosures are done by people at arm's length.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Preston.
So basically, once the foreclosure is completed by the department's legal representatives, once that transpires, then it's totally left to the Sheriff's Department and part of the process. Is that covered under the Act? I know if someone's property is sold for property taxes, I believe I'm correct on this, that the property is sold for property taxes. Again, the same process has gone through. If there's any other liens on the property, the money can be dispersed to whoever makes application to the court. Any funds that are left, the previous owner of the property has to go to the court and also make application to release the remainder of the funds. Is that the same process that's used in this case?
Thank you, member. The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The court ultimately has to be approached, first of all, if you got a lien. So if you don't show up, you've missed your opportunity to claim. But this is really it's an arm's length process, and we leave it to the courts, the lawyers. We have an agreement in place. We are one creditor. As the mortgage holder, I guess we have a preferred position, and once we're paid out, then really we don't have any claim to the residue.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, and I appreciate the answer on that. I know it's a very difficult thing for many people when this whole thing transpires. Hopefully it never does, but unfortunately it does. During these sort of cases, and you may have already answered my question because you had a problem in your own area, is there any leeway in the rules and regulations and agreements you have in place for your department to intercede and do something, or is there a process in place that you can do something to help get these things? In other words, one example might be to rewrite the mortgage over a longer period of time, or to make some alternate payment arrangements, or anything like that the department can do to alleviate the stress on maybe someone that's under a very serious financial situation, perhaps for a short time.
Thank you, member. The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to make reference to a certain book of mortgages that we manage as a result of taking them over from Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation as part of the social housing agreement. Those mortgages have set terms, they're frozen, and we do not have any flexibility to change the terms. And in some cases, we would love to have changed the terms, but I understand the rationale for this is that some of them were taken out in the 80s when the mortgage rates were up around 20%. They were put out at several points below market, and presumably CMHC floated a bond issue or whatever they do to finance them, and they have locked in the rate that their customers have to pay, and we do not have any flexibility to change that arrangement with them. I wish I could give the honourable member a different answer, but I've been down that path in the last year and asking those questions, and that was very clearly my answer, and I asked the question more than once, and I think I asked on behalf of somebody that's near and dear to the honourable member's heart.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
I'm sure the minister has, and I appreciate that assistance with this matter. Is there a possibility? I'm looking at the future here as well, because it's a very serious problem. I mean, if someone has a lifetime investment in a home, and for whatever reason they lose that home because they can't pay the mortgage, maybe for a short period of time, or whatever the case may be, because every case is probably different. Is there any way that the province could, in situations where the principal on the property is a whole lot less than the total value of the home is even today, could maybe guarantee those loans at a private bank so people could get loans, or some arrangement like that could be made to ensure that people can stay in their homes? Is that anything like that been looked at by the department?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This exactly goes into the discussion that I've had with my staff on this matter at some length over the last number of months, really over the last year. And to answer the member's question, as a go forward, conceivably that's possible, because if it comes from the Family Modest Housing Program, that's entirely provincial, and we would have more discretion in that area. But if it's one of the old Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation mortgages, we're locked in, and we are obliged to hold the customer, the mortgagee, to the terms of the agreement, and we have no flexibility to assist them, even though one could make a compelling case it's the right thing to do. We just do not have that ability to deviate from the terms of the agreement.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
Perhaps the minister maybe didn't fully understand my question. It would be my understanding, and maybe you can answer just this one question, and I'll follow up with the rest of my thoughts. If I had one of those mortgages, which I don't have, but if I had one of those and I was in arrears on my payments, and for some reason I could go to a bank, or someone on my behalf could go to a bank, a family member or whatever, and say, okay, I'm going to pay off this $10,000 mortgage plus the penalties or whatever are with that, take it to a private lending institution, and then take this mortgage over, and then I now buy the mortgage out from the agreement I have with the province, formerly the federal government, and now I have it with a bank like any other mortgage with anybody else. Could that be done today?
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
I make reference to the Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation mortgages. I believe that's what we're talking about. The member is nodding yes. In those cases, it is my understanding that we do not have any flexibility, whether you could pay it out in advance with a penalty, which would be considerable. We could ask that question, but I don't think that the answer is going to be any different, because I've been around this mulberry bush, so to speak, more than a few times, because I know of the case that the member is concerned about, and I can tell the member that this consumed a fair amount of my time personally, and my deputy minister, my assistant deputy minister. We asked all these questions. We went to the lawyers, and we tried to find a way to accommodate this person so that we would not be in a position where we had to go through with the foreclosure. We very much wanted to reach an accommodation, and we were not able to release them from the terms of the original CMHC mortgage.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
Maybe you're not understanding my question. and I appreciate the answer on the situation that you're talking about. If I have a mortgage under this process, which again I stress I do not have, but if I had a mortgage under this process, under that old agreement it's very inflexible, can I buy the mortgage out? That's the question.
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I believe the answer is no. But, you know, we can double check again. I can remember asking those questions back when this came up, and I was left with the impression that it was absolutely locked in. So the answer is no, but we'll go back and we will ask that question again.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston, you have the floor. About 10 minutes remaining.
Well, I hope the minister's wrong. I really do hope you're wrong. And I think probably you are, because I've never heard of a mortgage anywhere that you can't buy out. I don't think anything exists like that. Because at the end of the day, whatever's owing, you can pay it off, and nobody will refuse to take your money that I've ever seen anywhere. Usually people like to take your money when they don't deserve to get it. But that I think is a serious question that has to be addressed here for many of the people that may be coming into this kind of problem or exist to have this problem now, that it's got to be a way that you can get out of this mortgage. I mean, you've got to be able to go and buy it out. If there's $10,000 or $20,000 left in it, you should be able to go to the bank, borrow the money, or to a friend, relative, or whatever, get the cash, pay it off. It's paid off. It's done and gone. And that's really the question I'm asking, because if that was the case, I believe the government then would have some flexibility to possibly guarantee a loan. I think it would be an unusual thing to do, but to guarantee a loan for that amount that's left, or to make some other kind of arrangement to get out of that very inflexible arrangement to something that's more flexible, that maybe the payments could be handled because the income was sufficient to handle that one, but maybe not handle this one. That sort of arrangement. Do you understand what I'm asking? And
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, what the honourable member is actually talking about is refinancing the mortgage at a lower interest rate, and that was clearly not an option as it was explained to me.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
no, that's not what I'm indicating. I understand that you may not be able to refinance something at a lower interest rate over a different period of time, whatever the case may be. What I'm saying is it possible to buy out these mortgages, straight buy them out? So if I decided tomorrow I'm going to buy a home from somebody that has one of these homes under this mortgage, can I actually take and buy this mortgage out and just straight buy it out? If I'm going to buy the house, can I buy the mortgage out? That's really my question. If the answer to that is yes, that means that something can be done with some of these mortgages, because you can buy them out and then deal with them afterwards.
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to be specific, again, I'm going to say no. I do not think that that's an option with these CMHC mortgages. But we've heard the members' questions, and I've asked my staff if they can go back one more time and look at this. But we did look at it at the time, if there was some way that your particular constituent could be accommodated by some sort of buyout or refinancing, and we were not given any encouragement that this would be possible. And in actual fact, I think as the member is aware, lawyers were deeply involved in this, and really were not given any encouragement that that was an option.
Thank you, Minister. The member for Preston.
Thank you. I am looking for information about my own situation, but I'm also looking for global information on this more specifically, because this could be quite an ongoing problem for the department and for hardworking people in Nova Scotia that may be an unfortunate situation for a while. So, and I know the minister, if he had a tool to do these things with would accommodate people whenever you possibly could. Now, that may not be possible every time, and I'm not saying that's, you know, I'm not insinuating anything else, and I know that's the case. So I'm really looking for ways to prevent this in the future, because I'm afraid in my own area, and maybe in the minister's area, maybe other members' areas here, that maybe some more of these issues come up. And if we can, between us, come up with some kind of a solution for this before it gets to a situation where someone has worked their whole lives to get a home, loses that home, and never have a hope in their life again of getting another home. And as you well know, and I don't have to explain to you, how dramatic that is for a family and for the individuals involved. It's extremely, extremely difficult. And in the case, and I will talk about this, I wasn't going to do that today, a little bit about the case that we have in mind, and I won't mention anyone's name, of course, but and I do appreciate the meetings we've had with your staff. That was very helpful, the information they provided me. I really appreciate that. They did really go out of their way to try to help any way they could. But in this case, it ended up that the individual owed very few dollars on this property, very few. I believe less than $10,000. I don't have the numbers here with me today. The end of the day, the family purchased the home because they were afraid that their mother, wouldn't be able to live outside this home. It cost the family over $80,000 to buy this house back. $80,000. And, you know, this is actually not acceptable in today's society. There's got to be a way. There has to be a way. And I know it's difficult, and I know some of these arrangements, when they're put in place, have the best interest at heart, and have the interest of the individuals at heart and the taxpayers at heart when they work at it. But when you take a family has to do this, to buy a home back that they almost owned, I mean, it's not acceptable. It's simply not acceptable when you go through that process. And then you see some middleman in the middle making $20,000 for doing zero, absolutely zero. Now, that's an argument for another day and how the process went. Now, I realize that the department did everything by the book, which they always do, and you have to do to protect both the department and taxpayers and the individuals involved the best you can. But how can we possibly ever let this happen to anyone again? That's really the question of the minister. The minister may not be aware of the amount the family had to pay and the sacrifices they had to make to buy this house back. Because without this home, it took the heart and soul away from a very dear lady, a lady that had difficulty. I've got to be careful what I say here in the chamber. Had difficulty understanding exactly what the notices meant that the department sent, what the implications of those notices were, and what would happen down the road has exactly happened. And this is a very, very difficult case. And I'm trying to gather more and more information on it. As I do, I'll make it available to the minister so you can see yourself what difficulty this has caused this particular family. And what I'd like to do is share that information with the minister once I have it all assembled, which I'm working on right now. But it's very, very serious, this whole situation. And the question I'm asking today, I want this never to happen to anyone else. Could you please respond?
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to assure the member that I never wanted it to happen to anybody ever, let alone in the future. But I would assure the member that in the case he's speaking of, I can assure him that nothing was done without making sure the appropriate legal advice was in place for the customer. And I do know other things about this that I'm not able to divulge to the member that I think would explain how it ended up being a much larger amount than the amount of the mortgage. But I will say that there is nothing that stops family, if somebody is fortunate enough to have family that have the means to assist a relative, whether it's a father, a mother, a son, or a daughter, from paying the mortgage for them. And that certainly would have always been an option to anybody. I mean, they just have to make arrangements to have the money come out of their account or put the money in the person that has the mortgage's account, and it can go forward. So that would clearly always have been an option.
Thank you, Minister, and the honourable member has about a minute and a half remaining in his time allotment.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and I do appreciate your reply. In this case, and I'm going to privately talk to the minister, if that's all right, about this case as well, so I can bring you up to speed on some of the other things that transpired here. And I think I know the information. Hopefully, the family shared the same information with me that you have through your department. And maybe I can talk to you about the information I have. You may not be able to talk to me about what you have. I understand that. But the point I am making here, that sometimes that the person involved doesn't truly understand what's happening to them. And I think in this particular case, that was the case. And the family was not aware of what was transpiring. And if they had been and would have been, they would have made arrangements to make the payments. And that's my concern with this whole situation. It's a situation where if it was happening to someone that typically is dealing this type of thing every day, would have easily understood and said, fine, you know, I've got to make some arrangements with my family or whatever, or whoever it's going to be to help me with this situation. But this person didn't understand the ramifications that's going on here, and I can give you some more information regarding that. And it made it very, very, very difficult for this person.
Order. Thank you. The time has expired for the Liberal Party. I'll recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East, and for Ledge TV, recognize that she is not in her seat, that she's in the seat of Cole Harbour member. Honourable member, you have the floor.
I know I don't have a lot of time, but there's a couple of issues that I hope to touch on this afternoon. And one of them is an issue that is cropping up in my constituency office at an alarming rate, an increased rate, I would have to say. And I believe, talking to other MLAs, they are hearing and seeing the same kinds of issues in their offices. And that is, there seems to be a harsher, there's something going on in community services where there seems to be a push on collecting money that people do owe community services, and they're not denying that. But what's happening is that an increasing number of constituents of mine that are coming to me needing my help, and right now I currently have 10, I believe, and they have received income assistance in the past. And through very hard work on their part, and probably on the part of their family and friends and whoever they can manage to get assistance from, and the government, they have managed to get off assistance. They have managed to get themselves a job, which is no easy feat right now in HRM. But the problem is that no matter what they've done in trying to get off of income assistance, and no matter how long they've been off it, and the cases that I'm seeing is they've barely gotten off of income assistance when community service is knocking at their door demanding in a very, I guess, not intimidating, but in forceful, thank you, in a forceful way, that they want any perhaps overpayments or money that community services deems is owed to them. They want that money back, and they want it back right now. They don't give people any assistance in telling them how to do that, how to make payments. They don't seem to be listening to people's issues as far as, okay, I've just gotten a job. I was on income assistance. I've just got a job. You know, if you're a single mom or a parent, you know, or a new family starting out, and you've had problems and you're trying to get back on your feet, you've got issues. Just because you have a job doesn't mean you have a bank account filled with money right away. When you first start a job, number one, you've probably built up some debts. Number two, you've got bills that are going to have to be paid. You've got to get transportation to and from work. You've got to clothe yourself still. There could be issues, you're trying to better yourself and get into a better place as far as housing goes. So what I'm looking for from community service is there's nothing in between. It's like community service, here you go, here's some money, and now you're not on community service, get the heck out of here. If you owe us some money, we want it back. We're not willing to listen to your problems. We're not willing to listen to what families have to say, and we're not willing to say, okay, we realize you still are not back on your feet 100% and that you still do need some help. And it's not a handout, it's a hand up. And people are looking for a bit of breathing space. And they don't need to be continuously hounded by community services to pay back money. It could be a small amount of money or a large amount of money. And these people are not debating that they owe this money. They're just saying, can we have some breathing room so that we can get, we've just gotten this job, we've just gotten our lives back where we think we're on the road to a better future for us and our children. And that's what they're looking for. But instead, community service can come in and take back that money, either through, if somebody's getting a tax refund, maybe this is the first, they've got a job now finally, maybe they've gone and gotten a bit of education or whatever and improved things, and they've got a job. The next thing they know, their tax rebate's gone. Or community service can come in and garnish their wages. Now, all these things that are hanging over their head can cause stress. Somebody's just started a new job, they're trying to look out for themselves and their family, and they're trying to be part of the, what we've got here going in Nova Scotia. So they're really just looking for a little bit of help. But as I said, there seems to be something afoot, and it's a crackdown at community services throughout the province. And I'm just wondering if this is at all tied in to this bonus, all these bonuses that are coming out of community services. Are these bonuses tied into how much money your staff can actually collect from these people? If not, what are the bonuses tied into? And if you can answer that question and maybe let me know if there's anything down the roads where community service is going to be looking at a way to help people in that period of time, like an adjustment period, instead of coming after them, the moment after they've got a job. Is there some way that, you can work something out there? Because it seems to me that the MLA's offices are becoming, it's like an outpost for community services. Like, I feel like, we are part of the social workers' sphere there. And, I'm not trained in that, and my constituency assistant is neither. And we're trying our best to help people. But when they go to the government and they can't get the help, or they've gotten help and then the government is coming after them continuously and not offering them any options, then it puts us all in a position that, we really, all of us shouldn't be in. So I'm just looking for maybe some comments on that, or if you can answer some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member opposite for her questions. And she touched on a number of areas. One is the collection of overpayments, and the other is whether that ties in any way with bonuses. And I think that the short answer in the latter is there's no direct connection, but clearly any well-managed department is going to have an understanding as to how they go about dealing with overpayments, and it should be done on a compassionate basis. The member talked about somebody that has just gotten that job, and perhaps they were on community services and they're moving off to start a career, and that's what employment support services is about. That's why we had 10,800 people in employment support services last year, and we invested $17 million in them to try to get them to that stage. One of the things we invested in them was the ability to have the tools to go to work, and it depends on the type of job. And if it happens to be perhaps a clerical job, that might involve a suit of clothes or a dress or maybe a new pair of reading glasses. So under the employment support services, I want to absolutely stress that there is provision available to clients that are moving off of community services. And in fact, if there's no drug plan with the new employer, we allow them to stay on the pharmacare program for up to a year afterwards. And that can be a big deal for some clients, because if you happen to be, say, diabetic as an example, and before we introduced our new low-income and Nova Scotian drug plan for diabetics, starting with diabetics, I mean, that would be like a kiss of death, because unless you're making a very substantial amount, you're not going to be able to cover the costs of your insulin, your strips, your syringes, all the other things that goes with being a diabetic. So very pleased that the Department of Health is now funding this for low-income Nova Scotians, but for anybody that's moving off of community services, we had made that provision in place to bridge them from moving from community services to work. Now, the specific case you're referring to involves an overpayment, which means that the client, for whatever reason, was paid more than they were allowed by policy. And often the most common form of that is if they got a Canada Pension Plan payment, as an example. But anyways, they were overpaid for some reason. If they go to a job and they're no longer a client, that file would go to Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. So the things that you were speaking of actually would now fall outside of the department. But the client's ability to pay is always taken into consideration, and I can tell you there's clients that have moved off to community services that have no means of repaying the loan, and they're put at a zero balance, or they're a zero monthly payment, because we know they can't pay anything. But they have to be in contact if they're caseworker, if they're with community services, or the collection officer if they're with Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, and they have to give them that information that would allow them to make that decision. So what I would say to anybody that's